Jim, Chinese leaders have pretty well explicitly stated that U.S. influence in the world is waning, that it's time for Chinese global leadership. Is China up to this challenge? It's not easy being the world's cop or being sort of in charge of international multilateral organizations. Are there some downsides for China on this?
There are several downsides for China on this. First of all, the question is anyone going to believe them? And what would Chinese leadership look like? If you go back over the history of the People's Republic, from Mao on forward to Deng Xiaoping and the subsequent leaders to Xi, the sense of China has always been, we are an example of a revolutionary government which will enhance development. And a way the message they tried to send the developing world was, if you want to develop, it's the Chinese model. And that's sort of what the implicit message they're trying to send.
Right.
But their behavior, in fact, has been entirely opposite. It's been exploited. The value of Chinese investment, for example, into Africa, with no strings attached, was very positively received by the Africans. But over time, they found that there are strings attached, and these are Chinese interests. The United States, the West still remains a global message. And this idea that the United States, the West is waning, is a real problematic one. We've heard it for decades. You can go back, for example, to the 60s, that the US was declining. Didn't happen. We go back to the 80s when Japan was supposed to be the next great superpower. Didn't happen. We're back at it again. There is an embedded strength in the US and the West, the liberal democratic and universalist principles, which gives us, the West, if you will, an advantage which the Chinese don't have. And I don't think from their behavior, and if you think about their own actions, for example, in the South China Sea and elsewhere, that this is something that they can really export. They'll have short-term wins, but long-term, they have real great problems and challenges to face.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about supply chains. Clearly, this is an area now of superpower competition. Can you describe the state of play now as you see it?
Well, I think the state of play in terms of supply chains, and I think it's a really important question, is if you think of, and again, let me emphasize, I'm not an economic expert, I'm not an economist, I'm a politics guy. But if you think of the corporate motives to invest significantly in China for cost reasons, and then develop that supply chain, what we found, of course, certainly during the pandemic, is that we've had a significant problem with supply chains.
Right.
And this is compounded by the geopolitical situation between the West, led by the United States, and China. And the message, I think, that is going out implicitly, if not explicitly, and again, it's not coming from the Canadian government, but I think the American government is a little more clear, and the Europeans are more clear. Huawei is a good example, is that you better rethink your supply chain. There are a lot of alternatives out there in East Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. There are alternatives in Africa, which can provide the benefits. And politically, you've got to face the potential problem that the governments will shut you down. And I think the message that's being sent implicitly to corporations is rethink this, start to think about relocating to other cheap labor areas, which can be efficient and effective, which are more in line with the West, than staying with China. And that's a nightmare, I think, for the Chinese. And it's a problem compounded by their aggressive and what I would call clumsy diplomatic behavior.
Right. And, I think you're right. Obviously, we've seen President Biden move very swiftly to review U.S. supply chains. What do you think the Canadian government should be doing on this?
We should be following suit. We should be looking very closely and arranging high-level meetings with corporate executives in Canada and making it very clear to them that you need to rethink how you do these things. And particularly, I understand corporations have sunk investments in China. You can't walk away from them, but your new investments have got to move elsewhere. I think, and the government has to become more focused and active and present in the issue of our relations with China, rather than living in the past. And where Canada's living in the past, we're still focused on Europe. We still look east